Good evening. It's 8 o'clock in Yerushalayim. This is WebYeshiva.org, and it's time to begin our regular halacha shir. We're talking about brewing coffee, making coffee on Shabbos, and the principles which we're going to cover deal not only with preparing coffee, but the principles cover a wide range of cooking issues on Shabbos. I specifically want to focus on the French press method of making coffee. You put the coffee into this a glass cylinder. You pour on hot water. You push the plunger down. The plunger forces all the ground coffee to the bottom. You pour off the coffee from the top. The principles have to do with what is and what is not a violation of cooking, and what is and what is not a violation of separating what you want to drink, in this case, or what you want to eat, from what you don't want. Let's see the source materials and let them speak for themselves. Uh, yes. First, the question of defining what is and what is not cooking. Now, remember that coffee beans, which you buy, whole coffee beans, which you buy and grind yourself, or ground coffee beans, you buy them already ground. The coffee beans were all roasted before you bought them. Well, maybe you roast your own, but of course, before preparing coffee on Shabbos, the beans are always roasted. Now, does brewing them constitute an act of cooking again? Let's see what the Gemara has to say, and then we'll proceed down to the modern poskim. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav Avdimi. Pamachat, once, Nichnasti acha Rebbe lebeta merchatz. Once I snuck into the bathhouse to observe Rebbe bathing himself. I speak North American English, bathing himself outside of North America. Well, I guess he was outside of North America, so he was bathing himself. Uh, Now, you might find that to be a little bit strange. Why on earth the Talmud would want to sneak into the bathhouse to see his Rebbe uh, bathing himself or bathing himself? Bikashti lahaniach lo pach shel shemen ba'ambati. I saw that he was going to anoint his body with oil, and I said, Rebbe, before you rub the oil into your body, let me heat up the flask. Let me heat up the flask of oil in the bath, in the hot water. It'll be more pleasant, and it'll be more effective if you rub warm oil onto yourself. Amarli, Rebbe said to me, Tol b'klisheni, take the hot water from the bath, put it into a second utensil, v'ten, and then put the oil into it. Don't put the oil directly into the hot water bath. Instead, take the hot water out of the bath and then put the flask of oil into it to warm up the oil. Shma minatlat. We learn from this story three things. And this is a very common pattern of Talmudic discussion. A story, and then Shma mina. What halachas can we learn from the story? Number one, Shma mina shemen yesh bo mishum bishul. The first thing we learn is that oil has a prohibition of cooking. You might have thought that warm oil and room temperature oil are the same. You might have thought that nothing actually gets cooked. It's not like taking chicken and cooking it, where there's so many chemical reactions that you end up with something very different when it is cooked. You might have thought that oil, whether it's heated or room temperature, is exactly the same, just that only the temperature is different. No, just heating it up is a violation of cooking, and therefore the same is true with water, even though it's exactly the same water and the only difference is the temperature. Just heating up the water is a Torah violation of Shabbos, even though it's not at all like cooking an egg or cooking chicken or cooking something else where there's so many chemical reactions that reversing the process is for all practical purposes impossible. Once the chicken is cooked, you return to room temperature, you don't reverse the cooking procedure. In theory, any chemical reaction could be reversed. But here we have so many chemical reactions taking place in practice, it's just impossible to reverse all of them. Water, on the other hand, or oil, if you heat it up and then let it return to room temperature, you have effectively reversed the heating procedure and you've gone back to exactly the way it was. You might think that a reversible procedure is not considered an act of cooking. Well, we learned from the story that Rebbe considered heating oil, water would be another example, heating it is indeed a violation of cooking on Shabbos. Shma Mina, the second thing we can learn from this story, Kli Sheni Enu Vasha, we can learn, the second point we can learn from the story is that Kli putting the oil not into the hot water of the bath, but into a second utensil, is not considered cooking at all. Cooking can be violated by Shabbos only in the Kli Rishon. Kli Rishon is the Kli which is on the fire, on the source of heat. Kli Sheni is the utensil, the pot, the pan, the utensil which is not on the source of heat. In the Kli Sheni, which is not on the source of heat, there's no violation of cooking in Shabbos. The violation of cooking on Shabbos is only in the utensil, which is Kli Rishon, on the source of heat. We're going to define this in greater detail in just a moment or two. Shma Mina, the third thing we learn, is Hefsher Zehu Bishul, that just warming something up, like oil, is indeed a violation of Shabbos. Okay, of all the things we learned from the story, the only thing I want to focus on this evening is the second point, that Kli Rishon, heating something in a Kli Rishon on the source of heat, is a violation of Shabbos. Heating something up in Kli Sheni, a utensil which is not on the source of heat, but could still be very hot, that's not a violation of Shabbos. That's the point I want to focus on. Now, the Tosafot on the sugya that we just quoted says as follows. Fascinating Tosafot. Well, I guess there's no such thing as a non-fascinating Tosafot. Tosafot says as follows. In Kli Rishon, on the heat, one violates Shabbos by heating up oil or anything. In Kli Sheni, which is not on the source of heat, you don't violate Shabbos. Tema, Tosafot says, this is amazing. This is surprising. This is what on earth is the difference between Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni as far as cooking is concerned? My shna Kli Sheni and Kli Rishon. What's the conceptual difference between them? I understand the practical difference between them. Kli Rishon is on the source of heat. Kli Sheni isn't. But what does that have to do with whether or not you're cooking? The iyad soletisbo. If the pot, if the pan, if the utensil is very hot, afilu klisheni nami. What difference does it make if it's rishon or klisheni? If the water or the oil in the utensil is very hot and you add raw food, it'll cook whether it's a kli rishon or a kli sheni. What difference does it make? A lot of oil, a lot of hot oil in a pan can be poured into a kli sheni. It's very, very hot oil, dangerously hot oil. Put into it food, it'll fry the food. Why should that not be a violation of Shabbos? The E ain't soletisbo. If the utensil is not hot, afilu kli rishon nami ain't mavasha. The kli rishon on the heat is also not going to cook anything. Uh, what defines cooking should not be this distinction between kli rishon and kli sheni. What defines cooking should be, is it hot or is it not hot? If it's hot, well, it'll cook. If it's not hot, it won't. And in halacha, as you know, the definition of hot, b'chol haTorah kula, the definition is yad soledet bo, temperature too hot for your hand, burn your hand. Um, what temperature is that? Well, poskim disagree among themselves. I just, like everything else in the world, the rabbis disagree about the exact temperature, how many degrees centigrade is the temperature of Yad Saladet Bo. There's a divergence of thought. I did some naughty experiments with myself, my family, and my neighbors. Put a pan of water on the cooker, put in a thermometer, put in my hand, ask other people to put in their hands in the cold water, slowly heat the water, and say, when you can't stand it anymore, take out your hands. And well, the naughty experiments which I did, not so well controlled, I admit, around 42, 43 degrees was the temperature at which everyone I tested had to take their water, they had to take their hand out of the water. So that's around Yad Soledet Bo. At this point, you are wondering, quite justifiably, why temperature is a measure of what will and what will not burn the hand. Um, this is somewhat of a conundrum, somewhat of an unsolved problem in the words of the contemporary poskim. After all, measuring temperature is a fairly recent phenomenon in the history of science. Uh, when the Mishnah and Gemara prohibit measuring things on Shabbos, well, back in those days, measuring things on Shabbos had to do with length, had to do with volume, but the idea of measuring temperature was an idea that had not yet come into the world in antiquity, and they had no idea about that. And therefore, modern poskim wonder whether or not measuring temperature falls into the category of prohibited measurements on Shabbos, and that too is a machloket. But in the 17th century, the inventor of the thermometer back in the 17th century was a Danish scientist back in those days by the name of Römer. He invented the first thermometer, and he put a scale on it. He marked different temperatures on the scale, and the Römer scale is still in use in certain engineering applications. But aside from a few engineering applications, his scale is no longer in use. His disciple was Fahrenheit, who created a much more useful scale, um, finding the coldest temperature he could in Denmark in the winter, marking that as zero, finding the highest naturally occurring temperature he could find in Denmark in the summer, marking that as 100, and that gave him what is today called the Fahrenheit scale, which is still in use in some backwards countries where they've not yet graduated to the metric system. Um, why on earth is all this interesting? Because uh, high temperature does not necessarily burn the hand. Consider a very simple experiment which you can do yourself, and I've done myself countless times. Prepare dough that you want to bake into bread. Place the dough on a piece of aluminum, a piece of aluminum foil or baking paper. Pick up the edges of the baking paper or the aluminum foil, place it into the oven, close the oven door, come back half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour later, when the bread is fully baked, open the oven door, put in your hands, pick up the edges of the paper, take out the fully baked bread, and put it on a counter to cool off. I've done this countless times, and I've never burnt my hands. Although it's perfectly clear that the ambient temperature in the oven is very high, close to 200 degrees centigrade, for 350 degrees Fahrenheit. The ambient temperature in there is very hot. The aluminum foil or the paper has been in there for 20 minutes. It's surely reached equilibrium with the ambient temperature in the oven. But of course, I don't burn my fingers when I pick it up. even though it is very hot, and any thermometer will testify to the high temperature of the paper or the aluminum foil, it's very thin, the heat capacity is low, and therefore the heat dissipates very quickly into my fingers, and I don't burn my fingers. What is Yad Soledet Bo? What burns the fingers is not temperature, but calories. Calories are a measure of energy. And if you don't have enough calories, if you don't have enough energy, then the skin is not going to burn. Nothing's going to cook. Well, this is something of a conundrum in modern poskim, why they speak over and over again about the temperature of Yad Soledet Bo, when that really should not be a measure of what can and what cannot cook. Uh, but let's get to the fundamental point of the Tosafot. Tosafot's problem is what's the conceptual difference between Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni? Uh, the only thing which should be important is whether or not the utensil is hot enough that it can cook. Yesh Lomar. The resolution of this conundrum is as follows. לפי שכלי ראשון מתוך שעמד על האור, דפנותיו חמים, ומחזיק חומו זמן מרובה. Kli Rishon, which is on the source of heat, a flame under it, or an electric heating element under it, or whatever the source of heat is, Kli Rishon, which is on a source of heat, the movement of energy is from the source of heat, from the flame or the electric heating element, into the floor and walls of the utensil, and then the heat is transferred into the contents of the pan, into the contents of the pot. That's the direction that the heat moves. Lachen natnu bo shiur dechol zman sheyad soledet bo aser, and therefore that has a definition of cooking as long as a minimum temperature of yad soledet bo is achieved. Klisheni. Klisheni is in concept just the opposite. Klisheni, af al gav de yad soledet bo, even if the contents of the food, even if the contents of the utensil in even if the contents of the utensil in klisheni are very hot, mutter, there's no violation of cooking there. She'en defonotav chamin v'holechu mitkarer. There, the movement of energy is from the contents of the pan to the walls. In Kli Rishon, it's the walls and floor which are heating the food or the liquid. In Kli Sheni, it's the food or the liquid which is heating the walls and the floor of the Kli Sheni. Now, the Tosafos, which we just quoted, is back from the 12th century, from the High Middle Ages, centuries before Newton came along. If I can reformulate, if I can restate the principles of the Tosafot in simple Newtonian terms, for those of you who are familiar with Newton, what the Tosafos is saying is that in order to have a violation of cooking on Shabbos, the first derivative of temperature with respect to time has to be non-negative. If the first derivative of temperature with respect to time is non-negative, that is considered a violation of cooking as far as the Torah is concerned. What is and what is not cooking does not depend upon what chemical reactions are taking place or not taking place, the Maillard reaction or whatever. What is and what is not cooking depends upon whether or not the temperature is rising or holding its own. If the temperature is declining, as it is in a klisheni, that's not called bishul. Bottom line, although it is surely prohibited to brew coffee in a kli rishon, that is to put the coffee into water, into a utensil, onto a source of heat, and boil it up. That's a Kli Rishon on the source of heat. If the hot water is transferred from the Kli Rishon into a Kli Sheni, which is not on the heat, then adding the coffee to that is acceptable. That is the whole point of the Sugya as understood by the Tosafot. Well, although we're not following our rabbis into the bathhouse to learn how to heat oil, exactly the same principles apply to brewing coffee or tea or anything else. If the hot water is in a kli sheni, you can add the coffee, the tea, whatever it is you wish to brew. That's okay, according to what we've learned so far. Now, let's see what the modern poskim have to say about this. Well, I'm old enough that I consider the Mishnah Brura to be modern, shade over 100 years ago. The Mishnah Brura says, Afilu ye'areh mayim chamim letoch hakli. If you pour hot water into a utensil, v'achakach yitain letocho ale te, and afterwards put tea leaves. Tea leaves, unlike coffee, tea leaves are not cooked, are not roasted, are not fried before you brew your tea. Tea leaves are always raw, uncooked when you brew your tea. There are two basic categories of tea. There's the ordinary brown tea, and then there's green tea. The only difference, well, maybe it's a big difference, but the difference between ordinary brown tea and green tea does not have to do with cooking. Rather, it has to do with fermentation. In Sri Lanka or wherever your tea comes from, the farmer harvests the green tea leaves. Tea leaves are always green when they're harvested. And in Sri Lanka or wherever your tea comes from, the farmer leaves huge piles of harvested green tea leaves in the sun. Fermentation takes place. There's no simple way to stop fermentation from taking place. Yeast is just floating around in the atmosphere all around us. We breathe it in all the time. Yeast is just all over the place. Yeast falls onto the tea leaves even before they're harvested, and the yeast do their thing, and they ferment the tea leaves. It's also a fairly complicated chemical reaction, but that among the things that happens is that the color changes from green to brown. But the chemical reaction is so complicated that the taste changes greatly. But there was no cooking. All of this happened at ordinary ambient room temperature, and therefore, whether it's green tea or brown tea, we're talking about a product which is not previously cooked. According to the Mishnah Brura, if you pour hot water into a utensil, for example, a teacup, then you cannot add the tea leaves to it. Why not? Sounds exactly like what the Gemara permitted, exactly like what the Tosafot permitted on the previous screen. What's wrong? Asur, the reason you cannot add the tea leaves to a kli sheni, Mishum de Mexic Mavashel, because it looks like cooking. It's a kind of mar'ita ayin, the appearance of cooking. Therefore, rabbinically prohibited. Gam shema hu midvarim kalei habishul, shemitbashlim afilu b'hadacha b'kli sheni. And here we get to the real problem, which the Mishnah Brura is focusing on, namely the problem of kalei habishul. Some things are very easily cooked. The example of the Gemara is small fish. Fish, the proteins in fish are structured very differently than the proteins of mammals. One of the big differences between mammals and fish is that mammals are warm-blooded and fish aren't. Uh, 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 fish fish are designed by a Kodesh Baruch Hu to live in cold water, and they just adapt the body temperature to the temperature of the water. And for various complicated reasons, this leads to very different kinds of proteins in mammals, very different kinds of proteins in mammals when compared to the proteins in fish. Um, the proteins in mammals are designed in a way. A protein is an incredibly complicated molecule. It's only quite recently have Scientists, chemists begun to figure out the way the protein molecule gets folded together. It's very complicated business. And there are all these sulfur bonds which hold the various parts of the protein together in a very complicated structure. The mammalian protein is designed in a way to survive in relatively high heats, body temperature of a mammal. Uh, the proteins in fish uh, don't get to that temperature. They only have to, those proteins in the fish only have to hold together in the cooler temperature of the water where they swim. And therefore, it doesn't take much heat to undo a fish protein. To undo a mammalian protein, you need a lot more heat and a lot more time, a lot more work to unfold it, to break the sulfur bonds and unfold it. All this is a complicated way of saying that meat needs a lot more cooking than fish does. Fish, basically, when you've heated it through, it's cooked. It doesn't need much cooking, especially a small fish. And the small fish that the Gemara is talking about, total cooking is accomplished just by pouring some hot water on it. And now it's fully cooked and ready to eat. There are some things like small fish, which are kalei habishul, so easily and quickly cooked that they don't require a kli rishon. They can be fully cooked just by pouring hot water on them. Now, the big problem here is that although the Gemara gives one example of a food which is easily cooked, namely small fish, uh, we don't know exactly what other foods fall into this category and which don't. And therefore, the Mishnah Brura is telling us we must be concerned that any specific food might fall into the category of kal habishul. Any specific food might fall into the category of easily cooked. We don't know exactly what the definition of that category is. And therefore, we must assume the worst. We must presume that any given food is kal habishul until proven otherwise. And therefore, we will not pour hot water onto any food, even in a kli, because maybe the food involved is kal habishul, quickly cooked, and therefore prohibited. And although the Mishnah Brura is talking primarily about tea, because Russia, where he lived, well, Poland, it was part of Poland in his days. Poland, where he lived, the political borders moved a lot. Poland, where he lived, was a tea drinking country, but he knew about coffee. He said, "V'chein hadin le'inyan kava." Although I've just discussed brewing tea, the din is exactly the same with coffee, even though coffee is previously roasted before you brew it, but it hasn't been boiled. It hasn't been previously boiled. We're talking about a new cooking procedure different from the roasting which the beans underwent before they're brewed. Well, still, you can't boil them. You can't heat them by cooking. It doesn't matter whether it's tea or coffee. You cannot prepare it in a kli sheni. That's the position of the Mishnah Brura, and that position is more or less universally embraced by the contemporary poskim. Let's go one step further. The Aruch HaShulchan. Aruch HaShulchan by Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein. Well, he was the great Rav of Navardik in Lithuania, contemporary, a little bit younger, a younger contemporary of the Mishnah Brura. I love this particular sefer. I think it's great. But aside from me, the sefer is highly prized and immensely influential. He says like this: Kevan dechol davar shehadachato zoe gemar malachto, since there are many foods which just rinsing them with hot water is all you have to do to cook them, have bishul, for those foods, just rinsing them in hot water is cooking, chayev b'Shabbos, that would be a Torah violation of Shabbos, just pouring hot water on them. Haderech hayashahu, and therefore, the only proper way to prepare hot tea or coffee on Shabbos, Lahachin tamtzit mebod yom is to prepare a concentrate before Shabbos on Friday. Prepare a concentrate of brewed tea or brewed coffee. Hu hadin bekava. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about tea or coffee. Bishar mine bishulim kaelu or anything else like that. Hot cocoa, chocolada or cacao, hot chocolate, hot cocoa, hot coffee, hot tea. It doesn't matter. The only proper way to prepare it is to make a concentrate before Shabbos and then dilute that with hot water on Shabbos in order to prepare your beverage. That right there is the Machmir position, which is embraced by so many poskim. Let's understand what we have up till this point. A simple reading of the Gemara and the Tosafot lead to a conclusion that there should be no objection to brewing coffee in a klisheni, namely adding the coffee to a room temperature container like a coffee cup, and then pouring the hot water onto it. However, we cannot actually do that because the Gemara never discussed whether or not tea or coffee fall into the category of kal habishul, and therefore we must suspect that tea and coffee are indeed kal habishul, and therefore cannot be prepared in a klisheni in the coffee cup or the tea cup. That's what we have up till this point. Now let's take a look at the opinion of the Igros Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein. Lo matzinu ela kalei bishul shemitbashlim b'kli sheni. The whole problem of kalei bishul, those easily and rapidly cooked fish in the Gemara, or presumably tea leaves or coffee, the whole problem was always raised only in connection with kli sheni. Why was it raised only in connection with klisheni? Because it's obvious. You can't put the tea leaves or the coffee into a kli rishon. I mean, that's really cooking. So they only discussed the prohibition of putting the tea or the coffee into a kli sheni. Aval, however, the kli shlishi, brewing the coffee in a kli shlishi, was never discussed by the Gemara or the Rishonim or anyone else. Leka devarim hamitbashlim, and therefore the conclusion is that just as, according to the Talmudic passage, there's no possibility in general of cooking in a kli sheni, kal habishul is the only exception. Kli shlishi cannot have any bishul at all taking place in it, even something which is kal habishul. And therefore, if the coffee is put into the coffee grounds are put into a dry, clean, fresh French press or into a coffee cup, the hot water is taken from the kli rishon and then put into a kli sheni, and from the kli sheni poured into the coffee cup or into the French press. Now we're cooking in a kli shlishi, and that has no prohibition whatsoever on Shabbos. Mamela tzarich lahachmir b'kli sheni. We have no choice but to be strict in kli sheni because we don't know what is and what is not kal habishul. Aval b'kli shlishi lo matzinu tam lahachmir. In all history of halacha, no one ever suggested being strict in kli shlishi. This, incidentally, is historically not exactly correct. There was someone who who actually insisted on being strict in kli shlishi, and that was the Aruch HaShulchan himself, whom we just mentioned on the previous screen. But Igros Moshe rejects that possibility out of hand. The Mishnah the Igros Moshe says, although you might claim that you are brewing coffee in a French press, which is a kli shlishi, that's not really what's happening from the halachic point of view. From the halachic point of view, you're just coloring the hot water. That's all. Just getting some of the flavor out of the coffee into the hot water. That's all. But halachic cooking, halachic brewing, can take place only in Kli Rishon, or for things which are Kale Habishul, and anything might be Kal Habishul, who knows, can take place in Kli Sheni, but surely not in Kli Shlishi. Bottom line, according to the Igros Moshe, the correct way to prepare, to brew fresh coffee on Shabbos is in a Kli Shlishi. And this is an opinion which, aside from the Aruch HaShulchan, all the other great contemporary poskim embrace. Um, Up until now, we've seen the mainstream of poskim. Now, let's see where there's some room for leniency beyond what we've said up till this point. I'm going to quote the Yechiva written by Rav Ovadia Yosef, the great Sephardic authority of the 20th century. And bear in mind that the issue at hand is not a subject of controversy between Sephardic and Ashkenaz poskim, and therefore this is not an issue where each team will follow its rabbis, since this is an issue which is not a matter of controversy between Ashkenaz and Sephardic authorities, so the rabbis on each side are of equal authority for everyone. The Rav Ovadia in the Yechiva begins by quoting Rabbeinu Tam, Ashkenaz authority, grandson of Rashi. Din irui mikli rishon kedin kli rishon atzmo shemavashel. The idea is as follows. If you have a kli rishon, which was on the fire, which was on the electric cooker, so therefore the water in there is a kli rishon, if you pour the water out of the Kli Rishon into a Kli Sheni, at what point in time does the status, the halachic status of the water change? At what point in time do we say that the water has changed its identity from being in Kli Rishon to Kli Sheni? What about when it's en route from the Kli Rishon to the Kli Sheni? According to Rabbeinu Tam, when the water is en route, being poured from the Kli Rishon to the Kli Sheni, it hasn't made it to the Kli Sheni yet, it still retains the halachic status of Kli Rishon. Only when the water is in the Kli Sheni does it change its halachic status into Kli Sheni. And that means that if you pour hot water from a Kli Rishon directly onto the food in a Kli Sheni, the Kli Rishon water hits the food before it hits the Kli Sheni, and that's called cooking in a Kli Rishon. That's the position of Rabbeinu Tam. Lefi zeh, asur la'arot al davar shelo nitbashel kodem Shabbos b'Kli Rishon. According to Rabbeinu Tam, it's simply prohibited to pour hot water from a Kli Rishon directly onto food or anything which was not properly cooked before Shabbos. First, you have to pour the water into the Kli Sheni and then add the food, not pour the water, hot water, onto the food. Well, mutar lishroto b'Kli Sheni. You can put the food, you could put the water first into the Kli Sheni and then soak the food in that hot water. Hare Kli Sheni ain't mavashel. The Gemara taught us that Kli Sheni does not have a prohibition of cooking on Shabbos. Omeri, one of the other grandchildren of Rashi from that generation, she'afilu b'Kli Sheni ein shorin oto hoil v'mayim chamim nira k'mavashel. The Ri is bothered by this problem of the appearance of cooking, kalei habishul, whatever you want to call it, and therefore Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri disagree about whether or not we should follow the Gemara, the leniency of the Gemara exactly, and permit what appears to be cooking in Kli Sheni. Rabbeinu Tam is Mekel, Ri is Mahmir. Ri requires going to a Kli Shlishi. Al Pizeh, the Piskei Tosafos. Piskei Tosafos was written by Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the Rosh, who was the last of the Baalei Tosafos. He put together the Piskei HaTosafos, the bottom line Psak Din, learned from the Tosafot. And he wrote, called the strict position of Ri is embraced as the psak of the Tosafot. The lenient opinion of Rabbeinu Tam is set aside, and that becomes the psak of the Mishnah Brura, and that is the opinion of the contemporary poskim as we have seen. But there is another opinion, and these are still the words of Rav Ovadia. Ulam, however, Hameiri, one of the great rabbis from southern France, the Meiri wrote, Mutar lishrot afilu davar shelo nitbashel kodem Shabbos b'kli sheni. The Meiri from southern France wrote, it's permissible to cook in a kli sheni as long as the water or the hot oil is there first, and then you add the food that you want to cook. You put the hot oil into a kli sheni and add the egg to that. Entirely permissible. Pouring the hot water onto a raw egg in a kli sheni, no, 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 because the hot water hits the egg before it hits the kli sheni. But if the water or the hot oil is already in the kli sheni, Meiri says exactly like the Gemara, that it's permitted to cook in there. That's halachically not called cooking. We have the explanation of the Tosafot why it's not called cooking, and no problem at all. V'chein mashma b'divrei Sefer Yereim. Sefer Yereim, written by Rabbi Eliezer of Metz. Metz at the moment is in France. It's one of these cities that, from time to time gets moved back and forth between France and Germany. At the moment, it's in France. Back in those days, of course, it was French. We're going to deal with the filter. We're going to get to the filter. Yeah, we're going to get to these issues. The V'chein Haran, from medieval Spain, many rabbis agree with the literal, straightforward application of the Gemara, and they're unconcerned with the possibility of something being kal habishul and therefore subject to halacha cooking and klisheni. So we have many rabbis who are on the lenient side here. Alpi Mikarodela and the Ginat Vradim, another great posek, they concluded that it's possible to be makel, to be lenient, if we're talking at worst about a rabbinic issue of cooking. Bottom line, lefizeh, mutar latet kos cham, shayad soledet bo. Bottom line, it's permissible to put the tea leaves or the coffee into a coffee cup which has hot water in it, even if the coffee cup or the tea cup is klisheni, even if the French press is klisheni, there are these poskim who permit putting the tea or the coffee directly into it. Well, we have a mainstream approach, according to which the hot water must first be in a kli shlishi, and then you add the coffee, and therefore the hot water would have to be taken from a kli rishon, transferred to a kli sheni, and from there into the French press, or from there into your teacup or coffee cup, and then you add the coffee or the tea to the hot water. That's the mainstream approach. Rav Ovadia has just given his approval to the lenient approach, skipping the Kli Shlishi and just doing it directly in Kli Sheni. Kevan shenahagu lehakel kedeyazo, since in many communities the minhag is to follow this lenient opinion and brew tea or coffee in Kli Sheni, in communities where they are following this lenient practice, Hanach lehem liyisrael, we should let them continue doing what they're doing. Im enam neviim, b'nei neviim hem. They have whom to rely upon. They have these lenient opinions, and we will not shake our finger at them. We will not rebuke them, and we will not instruct them to be strict. If the minhag of the community is to brew tea or coffee in a kli sheni, we will remain silent. We will smile at them. We know that they have whom to rely upon. If they ask for advice, advice is, of course, always to follow the mainstream poskim and to prepare the coffee or tea in a kli shlishi. Uh, does the leniency exist? Yes. Should we advise that people follow it? No. If people are following the leniency, there's no reason to interfere. Up until this point, we've dealt with the problem of brewing the coffee. Now we're going to turn to the question of filtering the coffee. And the same problem applies to tea. When you drink the coffee or tea, you don't want to get the tea leaves in your mouth. You don't want to get the coffee grounds in your mouth. You want all that to stay in the container. So as far as the French press is concerned, you push down the plunger, and that filters the coffee. Well, there are many ways that the filtering might take place. Let's see the issue and whether or not there are any solutions. The Mishnah Brura says, Asur livror bekli shederech livror bro, kagon nafu kavara. Any utensil which is usually used for separating good from bad, any utensil which is usually used for filtering is a kli miyuchad. Let's get that typed correctly on chat. Kli miyuchad, a kli, a utensil specially made for separating, and that is prohibited on Shabbos. You can never use a kli miyuchad. You can never use a specially designed utensil for separating anything from anything on Shabbos, and that would seem on the face of it to eliminate the possibility of using filter paper or using the plunger in the French press. The Mishnah Brura repeats this idea a number of times. Asur livror bekli hamyuchad l'chach. He repeats it more times. Asur leklot shuman atzaf al pnei chalav. Back in those days, and indeed when I was young, not so long ago, we did not have homogenized milk. Uh, People probably don't even know that there's such a thing as non-homogenized milk. But milk, when it comes from the cow, is a colloidal suspension of fat globules, which are colloidally suspended in the milk. Now, the fat globules, which are colloidally suspended in the milk, are so big that they cannot dissolve. On the other hand, they're small enough so that they stay floating around in the milk, unless you allow the milk to stand. If you allow the fresh milk straight from the cow, if you allow it to stand, then the milk fat, the globules of milk fat, are going to eventually clump together. They'll become so big that they'll come out of colloidal suspension, and being of low density, they will float to the top. The cream is on the top and the milk is on the bottom. When we used to buy a bottle of milk, that's the way it was. The top was the cream, the bottom was the milk. You could shake it up if you wanted and reestablish the colloidal suspension, or you could just carefully pour off the cream if what you wanted was cream to make whipped cream or for whatever recipe you wanted the cream for. Well, if you have if you have a oh well, that's wrong right now. The If you have a glass, a bottle, if you have a container of milk with the cream floating on top, there it goes. Did it? If you have a container with cream floating on the top and you carefully pour off the cream from one container into another, so now you have only the cream in a separate container. You can use that to make whipped cream or whatever the recipe you have for using the cream is. Well, you've used a utensil for separation purposes. You've used the bottle itself as a tool to carefully separate the cream from the milk. Well, you've used the bottle as a tool for doing that, and therefore the bottle can be considered a special tool, a kli miyuchad, for separating cream from milk. Indeed, how else would you separate the cream from the milk? That's exactly the way you do it. Um, uh, and therefore, you're not allowed to separate the cream from the milk on Shabbos. Al kain, therefore, yizaher כשמגיע סמוך לחלב יניח קצת עם החלב. Therefore, If you want to separate the cream from the milk on Shabbos, start to pour the cream off into a separate container, but be careful to stop and not pour all the cream into a second container. Leave some cream floating on top of the milk. If you leave some cream floating on top of the milk, you've not completed the separation process. After all, the moment the prohibition of separating is violated is when you've got the completion of pouring the cream off. All the cream is in one container, all the milk is in another container. That's the point in time in which you're guilty of violation. If you stop the separation procedure before pouring off all of the cream, all is well. And back in those days, if you wanted cream to add to the coffee, you could pour off a little bit of the cream, add that to your coffee, and you're fine. You did not violate the prohibition of separating because you did not complete the process of separating the cream from the milk. Sorry, that's a permissible way of separating some of the cream from the milk. אבל אסור לקח השומן בצמצום. You cannot remove the cream entirely, getting precisely every last bit of it out. אפילו דעתו לאכול לאלתר, even though you want to use it right away. הרי הוא לוקח בכף, since you're using a utensil for separating, not doing it with your hands, you need the utensil in order to accomplish the separation. That's a violation of Shabbos. Well, let's think about the French press for a moment. If you press the plunger down, if you press the plunger all the way down, then at the bottom you're going to have only coffee, and on top only the coffee grounds are going to be on the bottom, and the liquid coffee is going to be on the top. If you press the plunger down and stop before you get to the bottom, then on the top you're going to have coffee to drink. On the bottom, underneath the plunger, there's still going to be a mixture of coffee and coffee grounds. You've not completed the separation process. And therefore, applying the principle of the Mishnah Brewer here, if you want to use a French coffee press, when you push the plunger down, don't push it down all the way so as to leave in the bottom of the French press a noticeable mixture of coffee grounds and liquid coffee. Well, according to this, a kaf miyuchad librera is always prohibited, and the filter in the French press is indeed a kli miyuchad, a tool for separating, and therefore you cannot use it for completing the separation process. Let's go one step further and understand the conceptual importance of eating or drinking immediately after the separation. Now, the idea is as follows. Most violations of Shabbos, writing, sewing, planting seeds, SOW, SEW, but most of the violations of Shabbos result in a product, a written document, a garment. Most of the violations of Shabbos have a product. Borer, the prohibition of separating, has two products. You start out with a mixture of what you want and what you don't want, and you end up with two products, two separate piles, one you want and the other you don't want. In order to be guilty of borer, you have to end up with two separate products. That's why pushing the plunger only part way down does not give you a violation of borer, because you don't end up with these two distinct products. You end up with one product, the coffee you want to drink, that's on top of the plunger, but on the bottom of the plunger, it's not only the coffee grounds, you got more good coffee down there also, and therefore you don't have the two products which are necessary in order to be guilty of cooking. Now, if you do not use a utensil, if you do the separation by hand, no utensil at all, so you're not guilty of using a special utensil, and you eat the good stuff right away and leave only the bad stuff. If you eat the good right away and leave the bad behind, behold, you don't have two products anymore. Why do you not have two products? Because you've eaten one of them and it no longer exists in the world. And in order to be guilty of separating, you need two products, the good stuff and the bad stuff. If you don't use a kli miyuchad, a special utensil, and you eat the good stuff or drink it right away, then the good product no longer exists. We're left with only one product, and that's not a violation of separation on Shabbos. That's the conceptual understanding of what's going on here. One final point has to be made in order to round out the picture, and that is the definition of exactly what is and what is not a kli miyuchad, exactly what is and what is not a utensil that you're allowed to separate by hand if you're going to eat the good stuff or drink the good stuff right away. And poskim disagree about how quick right away has to be. Um, that could be the subject of another shiur about exactly how quick you have to eat the good part or drink the good part in order to be free of the violation of cooking. But it has to be pretty quick. Uh, but what is a kli and what is using the hands? Well, let's see what Ramosha Feinstein says. Pashut, it's obvious to him. Shekelim ele misayim l'maisa l'brera. Some utensils obviously are accomplishing the separation, like the filter in the French press or filter paper used for in brewing coffee, or the tea bag itself is a filter. Some things are obviously accomplishing the filtering process, the separation process. They're prohibited on Shabbos. The tea bag, of course, accomplishes borer, separating only if you squeeze out the tea from the tea leaves. If you leave a mixture of tea and tea leaves in the bag, you've not accomplished borer at all, and therefore you're okay. Lachein yesh lachshiv ze borer b'kli. The filter paper is definitely a violation of using a kli, a utensil for separating. However, im hakelim einam mo'ilim biyado. If the utensil you're using accomplishes no more than you could have done by hand with your fingers, the only reason you're using the utensil, you want to keep your fingers clean. So you're using a utensil, but you could have done the same job with your fingers. You're using a fork and knife to separate the meat from the bone. You could have used your fingers for that. The only reason you're not using the fingers is because you want to keep your fingers clean, but the knife and fork are not doing a better job than you could have done with your fingers. Oh, machmachu rachok, venu yachol hagia biyado. Or the only reason you're using a fork is because you have to reach further than your arm reach. But if you could get there, you could use your fingers. Oh, mahmat shu davar lach, venu yachol likach biyado v'chadameh. If we're talking about something which is wet, peas in a bath of water, you could put in your hand and scoop out the peas, or you could use a slotted spoon. The slotted spoon is not doing any more than you could have done with your hand, and therefore the slotted spoon is not called a kli miyuchad, and therefore using a utensil which accomplishes nothing more than you could have done by hand is not a violation of borer at all. Now, as far as the French press is concerned, or the filter paper used for coffee or the tea bag, as far as these are concerned, the filtering done is indeed better than you could have done by hand, and therefore these are kelim miyuchadim, And therefore, the only basis for leniency would be to leave a mixture of tea and tea leaves in the bag, not squeeze out all the tea, or leave a mixture of coffee grounds and coffee underneath the filter in the French press. He goes on and brings a number of proofs for his contention, but that is the mainstream thinking of the poskim. In any event, with this, we're going to pause and end the shiur for today. Next week, in this time slot, I'm going to be speaking about a different topic, which is, as far as I know, has not yet been established. No, yes, it has. Next week, I'm going to be talking about preserving the environment, a very important topic nowadays. That'll be for next week. Until then, I wish you a good week and eventually a Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to seeing you all again a week from tonight. Until then, Shalom, Shalom.